Get out of my cafe before I call security. The words cracked through the elegant coffee shop so sharply that conversation stopped in mid-sentence. Ceramic cups hovered halfway to waiting lips, and every curious eye turned toward the black woman standing quietly beside the entrance with a well-worn leather wallet resting in both hands. Nyla Carrington did not flinch. She simply looked at the white CEO across the polished marble floor, as though hoping he might notice something he had missed. Holden Ashcroft had built one of the most successful luxury cafe brands in the Southeast, and he trusted first impressions more than almost anything else. To him the scene looked obvious. A woman dressed in a faded denim jacket had walked into his flagship location carrying someone else's wallet during the busiest part of the afternoon. He never paused long enough to ask why. "That belongs to one of our guests," he said firmly. "Leave it on the counter and go." A quiet murmur spread through the room. Some customers exchanged uncomfortable glances while others assumed the CEO must know something they did not. Nyla carefully raised the wallet a few inches. "I found it outside," she said calmly. "I was trying to return it." Holden barely listened. "I've heard enough." The sentence landed harder than any raised voice could have. For a heartbeat nobody moved. Then Nyla gave a small nod, placed the wallet gently on the counter exactly where everyone could see it, turned toward the glass doors, and began walking away without another word. If stories about dignity, unexpected justice, and quiet courage speak to you, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from. Because what happened next transformed an ordinary afternoon into a moment nobody inside that cafe would ever forget. Just before Nyla reached the exit, sunlight poured through the front windows and illuminated the inside of her left wrist. Gavin Mercer, Holden's longtime bodyguard, froze where he stood. His eyes locked onto a pale crescent-shaped scar that time had never erased. The color drained from his face. Somewhere beneath years of discipline and professional composure, a memory he had buried long ago came rushing back with startling clarity. He took one slow step forward, unable to look away, while Nyla disappeared through the doorway into the bright afternoon. Holden noticed Gavin's expression and frowned. In more than a decade, he had never seen his bodyguard shaken by anything. "Gavin?" he asked. There was no answer. Gavin continued staring at the closed door as though a ghost had just walked out of the building. He whispered only 4 words, so quietly that Holden almost missed them. "It can't be her." The cool afternoon air greeted Nyla Carrington the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk, yet the embarrassment she had just experienced never appeared on her face. She adjusted the strap of her faded canvas bag, slipped both hands into the pockets of her worn denim jacket, and continued walking through the busy downtown streets as though nothing unusual had happened. People hurried past carrying shopping bags and paper coffee cups, traffic rolled steadily beneath green lights, and the city moved with the familiar rhythm she had known for years. Moments like the one inside the cafe were never easy, but they were not unfamiliar either. Life had taught her long ago that arguing with someone who had already decided who you were rarely changed anything. What mattered was refusing to let another person's assumptions become your own reflection. 2 miles away, inside a modest brick duplex on a quiet residential street, an aging woman sat beside a sunny living room window carefully folding laundry, while listening for footsteps she recognized better than any sound in the world. Eleanor Carrington smiled before the front door even opened. "You are home early," she called gently. Nyla walked inside carrying a small paper grocery bag instead of the wallet she had intended to return. She leaned over, kissed her mother's forehead, and smiled with the same warmth she offered everyone, regardless of how the day had treated her. "I stopped by the pharmacy first," she said while placing several prescription bottles on the kitchen counter. Eleanor noticed the tiredness hidden behind her daughter's eyes, but chose not to ask questions immediately. She knew Nyla well enough to understand that kindness sometimes came with silent burdens. Years earlier, Nyla had been one of the youngest emergency room nurses at a respected Charlotte hospital. Patients remembered her because she never rushed through conversations, even during the busiest shifts. Co-workers admired the calm confidence she carried into difficult moments. When Eleanor's health began declining, Nyla quietly stepped away from the career she loved without complaining or seeking recognition. Since then, she had pieced together part-time work, neighborhood volunteer projects, and temporary medical assignments whenever her mother's appointments allowed. Money became tighter, but her values never changed. Returning a stranger's lost wallet had not felt extraordinary to her. It had simply been the obvious thing to do. Later that evening, after Eleanor had fallen asleep in her favorite chair beneath a hand-stitched quilt, Nyla sat alone on the small front porch watching the last streaks of sunlight disappear behind rows of maple trees. She replayed the afternoon only once before letting it drift away. She hoped whoever had lost the wallet would eventually get it back. Beyond that, she expected nothing. She certainly did not know that inside the luxury cafe across town, one man could not stop thinking about the scar on her wrist, while another had not yet realized that the woman he dismissed without a second thought was about to change his understanding of success, character, and respect forever. The following morning, Holden Ashcroft stood alone inside the executive office overlooking the flagship cafe long before the first rush of customers arrived. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Charlotte skyline while the aroma of freshly roasted coffee drifted upward through the quiet building. Success surrounded him in every direction. Awards lined the shelves. Business magazines displayed his photograph beside headlines praising his leadership. Expansion plans covered the conference table. Investors trusted his judgment because he had transformed a single neighborhood coffee shop into one of the fastest-growing premium cafe brands in the Southeast. Holden believed every achievement could be traced back to one principle. He made decisions quickly and rarely questioned his instincts. His executives often joked that he could evaluate a person within 30 seconds of meeting them. Holden never laughed at the comment because he believed it was true. Experience, discipline, and years of building a successful company had convinced him that appearance, posture, confidence, and behavior revealed more than people realized. Over time, that confidence quietly became certainty. Certainty slowly became habit. And habit eventually became something even more dangerous. He stopped asking whether his first impression might be incomplete. During the weekly leadership meeting, department heads discussed customer satisfaction scores, quarterly revenue, and plans for opening 3 additional locations before the holiday season. Holden listened carefully, offering precise suggestions and correcting details that others overlooked. Employees admired his intelligence and work ethic because he demanded excellence from everyone, especially himself. Yet beneath that disciplined exterior lived an assumption he had never seriously challenged. He believed people who belonged in successful places naturally looked as though they belonged there. His assistant placed a folder beside him containing customer feedback collected from the previous afternoon. Most comments praised the atmosphere, the service, and the quality of the coffee. One short message caught his attention. A guest wrote that an uncomfortable incident involving a woman near the entrance had changed the mood inside the cafe. Holden stared at the sentence for several seconds before quietly closing the folder. He told himself the situation had been handled appropriately. Protecting customers and the company's reputation always came first. Still, the memory refused to disappear as easily as he expected. Across the office, Gavin Mercer stood near the window in unusual silence. Normally calm and focused, he seemed distracted, replaying something only he could see. Holden noticed it immediately. "You have hardly spoken since yesterday," he said. Gavin hesitated before answering. "I keep thinking about that woman." Holden leaned back in his chair. "She returned a wallet. That was the end of it." Gavin slowly shook his head. "I do not think that is the end." Holden studied his bodyguard's expression. For more than 12 years, Gavin had remained composed through difficult negotiations, public events, and unexpected situations. This was different. His concern seemed personal. Holden folded his hands across the polished conference table. "What are you not telling me?" Gavin looked toward the cafe below where early customers began filling the dining area. Sunlight reflected across the marble floor exactly as it had the afternoon before. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "That scar on her wrist was not ordinary. I have seen it before. A long time ago. I just cannot remember where." Holden frowned. He respected Gavin's instincts almost as much as he trusted his own. For the first time since the incident, a small seed of doubt entered his thoughts. Neither man realized that the answer they were searching for had already been preserved inside the cafe's security cameras, quietly waiting for someone willing to look beyond a first impression. Later that afternoon, Gavin requested access to the café security recordings under the simple explanation that he wanted to review the previous day's incident. The operations manager unlocked the surveillance system without hesitation because security reviews were routine. Multiple camera angles filled the large monitor inside the control room, the front entrance, the sidewalk, the ordering counter, the outdoor seating area. Gavin stood with folded arms while Holden quietly entered a few moments later, curious to discover why his bodyguard remained so unsettled. Neither man spoke as the recording began. Customers moved in and out of the cafe beneath bright Carolina sunshine, carrying shopping bags, business briefcases, and paper cups. Then a familiar figure appeared on the sidewalk. Nyla Carrington was walking at an unhurried pace when something caught her attention near the curb. She stopped, looked down, and carefully picked up a leather wallet that someone had accidentally dropped while entering the cafe. Instead of opening it or looking inside, she glanced around the sidewalk searching for its owner. Several pedestrians continued walking without noticing anything. A delivery driver loaded boxes into a nearby truck. A couple entered the cafe laughing together. After waiting several seconds with no response, Nyla walked directly toward the entrance holding the wallet with both hands exactly, as though she wanted to avoid damaging it. Holden leaned slightly closer to the monitor. The recording continued from another camera inside the cafe. Nyla stepped through the front doors and quietly asked the nearest employee whether anyone had reported losing a wallet. The employee appeared uncertain and looked toward the manager before Holden himself entered the frame. Without audio, every movement became more revealing. Holden watched his own confident stride, his firm gestures, and the moment he pointed toward the exit before allowing the situation to develop any further. Nyla attempted to explain something while extending the wallet forward. She never raised her voice. She never appeared angry. She simply waited for someone to accept what she had found. Instead, the recording showed her lowering the wallet onto the counter exactly where everyone could see it before calmly turning toward the door. Gavin paused the video. The room fell completely silent. Holden stared at the frozen image of Nyla walking away with her shoulders relaxed and her head held high. The scene looked entirely different from the version he remembered. Yesterday he believed he had acted quickly to protect his business. Today the footage showed something else. It showed a woman trying to do the right thing while he refused to give her even a full minute to explain herself. Gavin rewound the recording once more, but this time he focused only on Nyla's left wrist as sunlight crossed the entrance. The pale crescent-shaped scar became visible for barely a second before disappearing beneath her sleeve again. Gavin froze the frame and leaned forward until his face was only inches from the monitor. His breathing slowed. His eyes widened. Another memory surfaced, stronger than before. Rain. Smoke. Sirens in the distance. A frightened little girl reaching through chaos with that same unmistakable mark on her wrist. He whispered almost to himself, "I know that scar." Holden looked from the monitor to Gavin's expression and realized this was no coincidence. Somewhere in the past, their lives had crossed with Nyla's long before either of them knew her name, and whatever truth remained hidden was finally beginning to find its way back into the light. Gavin remained motionless long after the security footage stopped playing. Holden had never seen his longtime bodyguard look so unsettled. For several minutes neither man spoke. The quiet hum of computer servers filled the security office while late afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished floor. Gavin slowly reached into his wallet and removed an old photograph that had become faded after years of being carried from one assignment to another. It showed a neighborhood community event nearly 2 decades earlier. Children smiled toward the camera while firefighters and volunteers stood behind them. Gavin placed the photograph beside the frozen security image on the monitor. He studied both carefully before pointing toward a young girl standing near the edge of the picture. Her face was younger, but the gentle eyes were unmistakable. More importantly, the sleeve of her sweater had slipped just enough to reveal the same pale crescent-shaped scar. Holden leaned closer. "That is her?" he asked quietly. Gavin nodded without taking his eyes off the photograph. "I was 16 years old. My father volunteered with the fire department. There was an apartment building evacuation after an electrical accident filled several hallways with thick smoke. Families were trying to find their way outside. I became separated from everyone for a few minutes because I panicked." He paused, collecting memories that had remained buried for years. A little girl reached for my hand and guided me toward a stairwell where firefighters found us. I never even learned her name. I only remembered that scar because she scraped her wrist against a metal railing while helping me. Holden listened in complete silence. Gavin had rarely spoken about his childhood, and hearing the story transformed the image on the screen into something deeply personal. I searched for that family afterward, Gavin continued. My father thanked several people that day, but we never found the little girl again. Life moved on. I joined the military, then private security. Eventually the memory faded except for that scar. Yesterday, when sunlight hit her wrist, everything came back. Holden looked once more at the recording. Nyla had entered his cafe carrying nothing except another person's lost wallet, and the same quiet dignity she carried while leaving it behind. He suddenly wondered how many other moments in her life had looked exactly like this, where people judged her before allowing her to finish a single sentence. The realization settled heavily over him. Just then the cafe manager knocked gently on the security office door. We identified the owner of the wallet, she said. He is a retired school principal from Asheville. He called this morning to thank whoever returned it, because it contained family photographs that cannot be replaced. Holden lowered his eyes. The gratitude should have belonged to Nyla, yet she had received public embarrassment instead. After the manager left, Gavin folded the old photograph and slipped it carefully back into his wallet. I have to find her, he said. Not because she saved something yesterday, because she saved someone years ago. Holden stood quietly beside the dark monitor, realizing that success had taught him how to build businesses, but had not protected him from making painful assumptions. Somewhere across the city, Nyla continued living her ordinary life, completely unaware that the truth she never bothered to defend was now beginning to change the hearts of the very people who had refused to listen. That evening, Charlotte settled into the quiet rhythm that arrived after the commuter traffic faded, and the city lights reflected across rain-soaked streets. Holden Ashcroft remained alone inside his office long after every executive had gone home. The conference room lights were off, the elevators had grown silent, and the polished building that usually echoed with confident decisions now felt strangely empty. He opened the security recording again without fully realizing why. For the fourth time, he watched Nyla Carrington bend down outside the cafe to pick up the wallet. For the fourth time, he watched her pause on the sidewalk, looking in every direction for the owner instead of placing it inside her own bag. For the fourth time, he watched himself enter the frame with complete confidence, interrupt her explanation before it could become a conversation, and point toward the door. The recording contained no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, and no visible anger. That was precisely what made it difficult to watch. Nyla never defended herself beyond a few calm words. She simply accepted being misunderstood and walked away with a dignity that no security camera could fully capture. Holden leaned back in his chair and slowly closed his eyes. Throughout his career, he had believed integrity meant protecting his company, acting decisively, and refusing to hesitate when uncertainty appeared. Yet the woman he dismissed had demonstrated another kind of integrity, one that required no title, no authority, and no audience. She had chosen honesty even when there was no reward waiting for her. She had chosen grace even after receiving none in return. Outside the office window, a gentle rain began falling across the city, softening the bright reflections of passing headlights until they blended into ribbons of gold and white. Holden found himself thinking less about the cafe and more about the kind of leader he had become. Somewhere along the way, efficiency had replaced curiosity. Confidence had replaced humility. He realized that he had spent years encouraging his employees to see potential in every business opportunity, while quietly forgetting to see humanity in every person. The thought settled heavily over him. At nearly the same hour, Nyla sat beside her mother's favorite chair with a warm blanket draped across Eleanor's knees, while an old jazz record played softly in the background. The small home glowed with the comforting light of 2 table lamps, filling every corner with quiet warmth that expensive architecture could never imitate. Eleanor looked at her daughter and smiled. "You always make this place feel peaceful," she said. Nyla returned the smile without mentioning the cafe, the embarrassment, or the questions that had followed her home. She believed kindness lost part of its meaning when it depended upon recognition. Helping someone remain worthwhile, even if nobody ever thanked you for it. Holden, sitting alone several miles away, had no way of knowing those words had just been spoken, yet they reflected the lesson he was only beginning to understand. For the first time in many years, success no longer felt like the most important measure of his life. Instead, one quiet woman he barely knew had forced him to confront the uncomfortable distance between being respected for achievement and deserving respect through character, and as the rain continued tapping gently against the glass, he understood that some mistakes could not be corrected with money, influence, or carefully chosen words, but only by finding the courage to face the person he had judged before he ever truly saw her. The next morning arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air as Holden Ashcroft asked Gavin Mercer to cancel every non-essential meeting on his schedule. Investors could wait. Expansion plans could wait. Even the board of directors would have to wait. There was only one conversation that mattered now. Using the customer incident report, the returned wallet, and the pharmacy receipt that had briefly appeared on the security recording after Nyla left the café, Gavin carefully traced the neighborhood where she lived. Neither man intended to intrude upon her privacy, but both understood that an apology delivered through a public relations statement or an assistant would only repeat the same distance that had caused the mistake in the first place. Shortly before noon, their vehicle stopped in front of the modest brick duplex on a quiet tree-lined street. Holden stepped out slowly, carrying the retired school principal's handwritten thank you letter that had been forwarded to the cafe after the wallet was safely returned. The neighborhood was peaceful. Wind stirred the fallen leaves across narrow sidewalks while children laughed from a nearby playground. Nothing about the place reflected the assumptions Holden had formed only 2 days earlier. Gavin knocked gently on the front door. After several moments it opened, and Nyla Carrington stood before them with the same calm expression she had worn inside the cafe. Surprise briefly crossed her face, but it disappeared almost immediately. She recognized both men without hesitation. Before Holden could speak, Eleanor Carrington appeared from the hallway and warmly invited them inside, believing they were visitors connected to one of Nyla's nursing assignments. The small living room was simple yet welcoming, filled with family photographs, books, and the comforting scent of fresh cornbread cooling on the kitchen counter. Holden looked around quietly. Every detail reflected care rather than wealth. Every object seemed chosen because it carried meaning instead of status. Nyla offered them seats and waited patiently. She showed no resentment and no visible satisfaction at seeing the powerful businessman standing awkwardly in her home. Holden took a slow breath before placing the handwritten letter on the coffee table between them. "This belongs to you," he said. "The man who lost his wallet asked me to thank the person who returned it. That gratitude should never have come through me." Nyla glanced at the envelope but made no effort to pick it up. Holden continued, his voice quieter than Gavin had ever heard. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I interrupted you before you finished speaking. I convinced myself I was protecting my business when I was really protecting my own assumptions. I cannot undo that moment. But I wanted to tell you this face to face because you deserved better than what happened." The room became still. Sunlight filtered gently through the lace curtains, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floor. Gavin then removed the faded photograph from his wallet and placed it beside the letter. Nyla studied the picture for only a few seconds before her eyes widened with quiet recognition. A gentle smile slowly appeared. "I remember that day," she whispered. Gavin smiled for the first time since entering the house. "I have been trying to remember you for almost 20 years. Holden watched the exchange unfold in silence, realizing that the woman he had dismissed as a stranger had quietly shaped another person's life long before either of them entered his cafe, and in that simple living room, surrounded by ordinary kindness, every assumption he had trusted for years finally gave way to something far more valuable, the truth. Nyla gently set the faded photograph back onto the coffee table before looking at Gavin with quiet warmth. "You were just a frightened boy," she said softly. "Anyone would have reached for your hand." Gavin smiled and slowly shook his head. Not everyone would have stayed calm enough to help someone else. The room settled into a peaceful silence as Eleanor poured fresh sweet tea into 4 simple glasses. Holden accepted his with both hands, feeling humbled by a kindness he had done nothing to earn. After a long moment, he reached into his briefcase and removed a neatly prepared folder. Inside was an offer for Nyla to become the Director of Community Health Partnerships for the Ashcroft Foundation, a position that would allow her nursing experience and passion for serving others to shape free wellness programs across neighborhoods that often lacked reliable access to preventive care. The salary was generous, the schedule flexible enough to continue caring for Eleanor, and every benefit reflected genuine respect rather than charity. Holden placed the folder on the table but did not push it toward her. "This is not payment for forgiving me," he said, "and it is not an attempt to erase what happened. After learning who you are, I realized my company has spent years investing in beautiful buildings, while overlooking opportunities to invest in people like you. Whether you accept this or not, I intend to change that." Nyla read the proposal carefully before closing it without signing anything. Holden prepared himself for a polite refusal, believing he deserved nothing more. Instead, she looked directly at him with calm sincerity. "I accept your apology," she said. "Not because it makes the past disappear, but because carrying resentment would only give that moment more power than it deserves." Holden lowered his eyes, deeply moved by words he knew he had not earned. Nyla continued, "As for the position, I will only accept if the mission is real. I do not want to become the face of a campaign that lasts a month. If your company truly wants to serve every customer and every community with the same respect, then I will gladly help build that future." Holden answered without hesitation, "You have my word." Gavin watched the exchange with quiet gratitude, recognizing that the same courage which had guided a frightened teenager years earlier still lived within the woman sitting across from them. Over the following weeks, Holden fulfilled every promise. Employee training shifted from quick assumptions to thoughtful service. Community outreach expanded into neighborhoods the company had never previously considered. Scholarships for nursing students were established through the foundation, and local health screenings became regular events instead of occasional publicity opportunities. Nyla accepted the leadership role only after seeing those commitments become reality. She never asked for a reserved parking space, a larger office, or public recognition. Most mornings she could still be found sitting with employees over coffee, listening more than speaking, reminding them that every person who walked through the front door carried a story invisible to everyone else. The lesson spread quietly through the company, not because it had been written into a policy manual, but because one woman's steady example proved that genuine leadership begins with the simple decision to see another human being before judging them. Several months later, the flagship café looked almost exactly the same from the outside, yet everything meaningful inside had quietly changed. Morning sunlight still poured through the tall windows, fresh coffee still filled the air, and customers still arrived carrying briefcases, backpacks, and shopping bags. But every employee now understood that no person's story could be measured by appearance alone. New team members learned that the first responsibility of hospitality was not simply serving coffee, it was seeing people. Holden Ashcroft no longer watched the entrance searching for problems before they happened. Instead, he greeted guests whenever his schedule allowed, remembering how one rushed decision had nearly blinded him to extraordinary character. His success as a businessman remained intact, but it was now guided by a humility that could never have been taught inside a boardroom. Nyla Carrington continued leading community health initiatives with the same quiet dedication that had defined her long before anyone recognized her work. She visited neighborhood clinics, organized wellness events, mentored nursing students, and listened patiently to families who often felt invisible. Whenever reporters asked how she had inspired such dramatic changes inside one of the region's fastest-growing companies, she always smiled gently and redirected the attention toward the volunteers, healthcare workers, and employees who served beside her. Recognition had never been the reason she chose kindness. Gavin Mercer often attended those community events as well, not because security required his presence, but because friendship had replaced coincidence. Sometimes he and Eleanor would laugh together while watching neighborhood children play, both grateful for the unexpected way life had reunited people who once shared only a forgotten memory. The faded photograph remained safely inside Gavin's wallet, though now it served as a reminder that the smallest acts of courage often outlive the moment in which they happen. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the misunderstanding, the retired school principal whose wallet had been returned walked into the flagship café once again. He noticed a framed statement displayed near the entrance. It was not a marketing slogan or a corporate mission written by consultants. It was a simple promise that every employee had chosen to embrace. Treat every guest with dignity before making any judgment. The elderly man smiled, ordered his usual coffee, and quietly thanked the young barista who served him. Across the room, Holden noticed Nyla preparing to leave for another community meeting. Their eyes met for only a moment. No apology was needed anymore because it had already been lived rather than repeated. Holden offered a grateful nod. Nyla returned a warm smile before stepping outside into the gentle afternoon breeze. Golden leaves drifted across the sidewalk where she had once found a stranger's lost wallet. People passed without recognizing the significance of that ordinary place, yet the quiet still seemed to remember. The wind carried the scent of fresh coffee through the open doorway as the city continued moving forward, unaware that one simple decision to do the right thing, answered by another person's willingness to confront painful assumptions, had changed far more than a single afternoon. Sometimes justice does not arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives as understanding. Sometimes redemption begins with listening. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who chooses kindness even when nobody is watching.